As the coronavirus rages across the United States and after weeks of protest against police abuse, has America's reputation taken a global hit? Hello, I'm Mike Walter, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. The U.S. response to its huge number of coronavirus cases and deaths has caused dismay to people watching around the world. Weeks of protests calling for an end to police abuse and demands for racial equality following the death of George Floyd while in police custody have also focused international attention on the United States. How is all of this impacting a younger generation that has grown up watching America over the last 20 years? Is its international reputation being damaged? To discuss this, I'm joined now via Skype from Washington, D.C. by journalist and author Max Blumenthal. Also joining me from Brussels is Peter Kleppe. He's a political analyst on European affairs. With us, too, via Skype from Amsterdam is Besan Kasem. She is a refugee from the war in Syria and is a former representative for Syrian and Palestinian Youth at the UN. And from Dallas, we're joined by Seth Denson. He is the president and co-founder of GDP Advisors and a political commentator. I want to welcome all of you to the show. Max, why don't I begin with you? The U.S. has certainly taken a beating of late about its handling of the coronavirus, of course, racial inequality, police abuse. Even more recently, assault on science, I should say. Dr. Fauci taking a hit from people in the administration. How much damage is this doing globally, you think, to the U.S. reputation?
Well, there's certainly some anxiety in Washington within establishment quarters. And there has been, I wouldn't even call it anxiety, it's a full-scale freakout, a meltdown that all amounts to and focuses on one man, Donald Trump, who, in my view, has lifted the mask on America's empire at home and abroad. And I think we saw a real turning point when Donald Trump authorized the military to go into the streets in Washington, D.C. on June 1st, in a really disturbing spectacle that began with Trump actually staging a photo op where he held a Bible after ordering park police to tear gas peaceful protesters. I was in the street that day and I saw two military helicopters engage in a show of force over protesters. They were 100 feet over my head, basically creating tornado-like conditions in order to intimidate and injure protesters. And I think for many people abroad, they saw Americans experience what people in Iraq, for example, had experienced, what people in northeast Syria had experienced, what people in Libya have experienced, Central Americans by proxy, which is sort of a U.S. military show of force and intervention that was aimed at civilians. And so in many ways, I think Trump is sort of lifting the mask on what America always has been. And unfortunately, so many people are paying the price here. We've seen that after Trump denied coronavirus for about 2 months as a threat. And now we have something like 140,000 dead.
Well, Besan, let me ask you, since Max went there, what was your reaction when you saw this show of force from the military?
From my point of view, it's like since the last 20 years, for us, like it's since I was born as a refugee, for us the United States is the one who's like having the power on the shoulders of the poor people, on the refugees, on the others. So for us, it's just this country is a fake, and all what to do is like just power, you know, to use the power and to use the weapons in order to freak people, which is not gonna last. You know, all of this is a fake. You know, it's this is for us.
Peter, let me ask you about CNBC, which ran a story recently. The headline read, "Europeans' trust in Trump's America is gone." 11,000 respondents across 9 European countries were surveyed. They have a very negative opinion of the United States, especially when it comes to its response globally to the pandemic. I want to get your thoughts. I mean, you must be talking to friends, associates there. Talk to us about the depth of alarm there in Europe as far as how the administration, how the United States is handling the coronavirus and a number of other issues.
Well, there's no doubt that U.S. President Trump is not very popular in Europe. If you compare with Barack Obama, it's a big difference. Obama got the Nobel Prize before he even did anything. He was cheered by crowds in Berlin when he was on a visit, and Trump was treated in a hostile way from the very beginning. That does contrast with what I would say European consumers still enjoying American products, Amazon, Netflix, Apple, you name it. So I wouldn't quite say that America is hated, but the criticism is definitely pointed towards Donald Trump. And to answer your question regarding his COVID policies, I mean, it speaks for itself, I guess. He has not been somebody that has been too alarmist. He has been flip-flopping. He's not quite sure what to do. I mean, that's quite clear. It's also, of course, the fact that it's not just the federal level in the US which is responsible, it's also the states. It's also true that in Europe, many politicians have been flip-flopping as well. I mean, scientists are not entirely sure. I think the jury is still out to compare Sweden, which had not really a lockdown, to other places which had quite a strict lockdown. I think it's really early to tell what was the best decision. Ideally, we could have avoided the lockdown, like in countries like Taiwan, for example, or Singapore. But I mean, it's really early to tell. Generally, the feeling is Trump is not dealing very well with the COVID crisis. Whether that's right or wrong, I think we have to be a little bit careful right now.
But Peter, I just finished reading John Bolton's book, and one of the things that comes out of that book is just kind of the alarmed nature a lot of these European leaders have in terms of the leadership from Donald Trump on a host of issues on the international stage. The Paris Climate Accord, the JCPOA withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, most recently stepping away from the WHO. So I want to get your sense about the leaders there, because one of the things he kind of points out is also their concerns about withdrawing so suddenly from Syria.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that is a great concern. Also, the fact that already in his election campaign, he suggested that he would not defend the Baltics against Russia. So indeed, there's a feeling in European leadership that they are being abandoned by the United States. Now, I think if you look at it, I mean, that's a justified concern, and it's not just Donald Trump. Already before, Obama had begun with his pivot to Asia. Of course, Europeans are guilty themselves. In my own country, Belgium, there's very little actual investment in the military. Most of the money goes to paying pensions, really, and staff, but not really to military capacity. So Europeans are guilty for having neglected their own responsibility to defend themselves. And now the United States are saying, look, I mean, for so many decades we've been paying for your security. Can't you just step up the plate yourself a little bit? So it's a genuine concern that the US is finally serious about this, and that Europe will actually have to divert spending from social programs to defense.
Seth, I want to give you a chance to jump in here, because we've had a chance to talk about a number of issues already. And of course, one of the things that Max brought up early on was the policing, the militarized quality of this during the George Floyd protest. President Trump doubling down on this law and order message once again at the Rose Garden yesterday as well. Do you think these protests and the response from the administration has hurt the U.S. reputation abroad?
Well, I think certainly the way that it's playing out on most mainstream media positions it in a way that someone who's dialing in for a 30-second spot would certainly think that the United States is trying to push a strong arm of military justice in our streets, when in reality, there's a much broader picture to be painted. Certainly there were peaceful protesters, and the beauty of America is our right to protest. Our country is founded on that. But when you have dissenters and you have people that start looting regular Americans and start punishing everyday business owners and entrepreneurs, then we would cry out equally for our leaders to do something about that. And I think when we start to look at any one of these things in a vacuum and in a 30-second spot, rather than looking at the entire picture, we're doing a disservice to the entirety of what's trying to happen in these protests.
Max, I saw a bit of a smirk on your face. Do you want to respond?
No, I don't want to interrupt. I think, that was a widely held view, particularly of people who weren't really around the protests and who were spectators. And I think just one of the most interesting points that I've been noticing looking back a month or a month and a half after the looting was the targeting of so many stores like Target and CVS that had pharmacies, because so many average Americans are unable to make ends meet, and we're looking for pharmaceutical and sanitary supplies. I'm not justifying anything. I'm just saying there was a real, once again, it was a mask lifting moment where the inequality was exposed for everyone to see. And I'll tell you, here in Washington, D.C., I witnessed a lot of the looting. It wasn't being done by Antifa, as Trump said in one of his obsessive law and order campaigns. It was being carried out by extremely poor urban black youth who were totally ignored in this city and who were basically thrown in and out of jails. Today, right now as we speak, Donald Trump is continuing his law and order campaign and boasting about arresting savage MS-13 members, referring to a Salvadoran street gang of petty criminals. And it's these obsessive campaigns trying to replay Richard Nixon's 1972 campaign that's costing him so much in the polls. He's doing nothing to answer the real pain of so many people, including people who voted for him because they actually saw him as a possible alternative to the establishment.
Well, let me ask you about this post 9/11 generation that we're seeing. People in their 20s and 30s who've grown up after 9/11. They've seen the economic collapse in about 2008, 2009. They've seen these shootings at Sandy Hook, and they don't really see the U.S. positioned by Ronald Reagan as this shining beacon on a hill. They see it quite differently. Go there, if you will, and kind of describe for us how they see the United States and where they'd like to see the United States moving forward.
Well, I'm part of that generation, and I moved to Washington, D.C. with my family during the Reagan era, and I remember seeing Reaganomics take its toll. The crack epidemic took place, violence spiked, homelessness was a completely new phenomenon, mass homelessness was a new phenomenon, and we've seen, through the Clinton era, when a Democrat finally got in office, the trends of neoliberalism continued with the gutting of welfare, the passing of NAFTA, the shipping of American jobs away. Then 9/11, which was the inevitable result of so many American proxy wars in the Middle East and Central Asia, brought to bear the security state and the authorization for the use of military force, which has yet to be sunsetted and basically authorizes emergency law and permanent warfare abroad. The financial crash under Obama, during which Obama bailed out the banks and sold out the people, leading to Occupy Wall Street, which was demolished, as many of these George Floyd protests will be. And so you have this feeling of mass hopelessness, and among youth, not of my generation, I'm Generation X, but among the Zoomers and the millennials, there is a complete loss of faith in this country or belief in the idea of the American dream. There's no illusion there, particularly in cities. And I wonder what any president, a potential President Biden, can do about that. I don't think there's much that can be done short of a sweeping program that goes further than the New Deal did.
I think the financial crash actually began under George W. Bush, but
yes. Obama failed to answer.
Yes, to your point. But let's talk a little bit more about Europe. Peter, I want to play for you some sound from the president this week. This is how he described the relationship with Europe. Let's listen in.
We're in tremendous economic competition, including Europe, which has never treated us well. The European Union was formed in order to take advantage of the United States. They formed, and they take advantage of the United States. And I know that. They know I know that. But other presidents had no idea.
Other presidents seeing people in Europe as allies. He kind of painting a picture of them as enemies. There's a quote in the New York Times from a president of a Berlin-based university focused on public policy. He said, when people see the pictures of New York City, they say, how can this happen? How is this possible? We're all stunned. Another university professor from Oxford saying, I feel a desperate sadness. Describe how Europeans respond when they hear President Trump equating the European Union as trying to rip off the United States.
Well, of course, it's wrong that the EU was founded to rip off the United States. Quite the contrary. Actually, it was America that pushed European nations to basically work together, and to a large part, the EU was about scrapping barriers to trade in Europe to avoid new conflicts arising. It's of course true that later protectionism was also oriented against the United States. So if Trump would be only criticizing European tariffs keeping out American products, I mean, that would be justified. But fundamentally, the EU project made Europe wealthier, stronger, and a stronger ally of the United States. And American businesses have also been enjoying the fact that Europe became stronger economically. Now, Trump is, of course, seen as an anti-globalist, and I think globalization has a lot of good aspects. I mean, if you look at the economic data, we all became wealthier. It's true that in the West, some parts of the middle class probably lost out, definitely in relative terms, but perhaps also in absolute terms in some cases. But on a global level, everybody gained from globalization. Now, global institutions like the UN, the WHO, that sort of made a lot of mistakes in the COVID crisis. I don't think we should confuse that with economic globalization. Also, the EU in Europe has, I mean, is in urgent need of reform. So I think it's healthy that people are critical to global institutions, to global politics, to supranational politics, to power in itself. It's very healthy to be critical to power. Now Trump, he mixes it all up. You can see that he's really, I mean, he's very American in some way. He's for free speech, he's for free trade, he's for business, for free enterprise on the one hand. But on the other hand, he represents a strongman tradition of politics that you find in underdeveloped countries. Also, he has been attacking the central bank. I mean, I don't think it's the role of the executive to tell the central bank what to do. It's typical for banana republics that leaders of governments order the central bank to print more money to finance government spending. And that's also one of the things that Trump represents. So he's an ambiguous figure. And I do think it's if you to return to the issue of America and American ideals, that I mean, the U.S. is on a crossroads. Will they go back to their roots, which is about free enterprise, the rule of law, hard money, or will they perhaps fall for big government, populism, protectionism? And what we see is that the opposition in the United States is not that liberal, so to speak, liberal in the European sense. They're not really strongly in favor of free markets. It looks like there's a whole, there's quite a powerful opposition that would like to experiment with more protectionism, with higher taxes, basically becoming more European and ignoring the fact that in many European countries this has not been a great success.
Well, Peter, let me kind of riff off what you were talking about, this kind of strongman persona. Once again, yesterday at the White House, he said the world needs American strength. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We've got the newest, most incredible weapons anywhere in the world. We have the best tanks, the best ships, the best missiles, rockets. We have the best of everything. We have the best fighter jets, the F-35.
Besan, what was your reaction when you heard him talking about that yesterday?
Regarding the situation in the Middle East, it's starting from like after 9/11. The people were celebrating and start saying about Syria and Iraq and Lebanon in the beginning. The people were celebrating because of this, but in the end, every on a daily basis after this date, all of like at least hundreds of people are dying on a daily basis because of this. Using the weapon because America is only following the areas that is full of natural resources. So it's the using the only the like unbelievable excuses in order to invade and economically and psychologically and in different points. Like for me, as when I start to grow up, that like where I can go and follow my dream or to achieve what I want, it was only to Europe. This is the only, and specifically like Germany or France or Netherlands, but not any other European country, because these are at least we're recognizing what is the human rights, and the United States was the first country who recognized Israel in the 48. So for us, like since 48, I think the generation where like each generation and each any age of this, they were grow up on the ideas that our first enemy is the United States. So following that.
So let me ask Seth, what's your response when you hear that?
Yeah, you know, listen, I think I have to look at the data, and I start to look at things of understanding that we still have roughly 20 million people that are trying to apply to get into the United States every year. Are we a perfect nation? No. The beauty of democracy is that you're constantly working towards perfection, recognizing that may be an unachievable goal. The things that administrations have done and the military has done in certain parts of the country, I can't speak for those things. But what I can speak for is that the heart of the American people is good, and that as you start to think about the information that is shared and how it is shared, I think that we have to start taking a deeper look at how that information is spread and at what level. And sadly, the free press doesn't always mean the unbiased press. And I speak as someone who's regularly in the press. And so I think that there are two aspects that we must look at here. First is, yes, America is going to focus on American interests, and then secondarily on global interests. And that as a country, America, by and large, for decades, has been the place that other countries that needed help would look to. And so for us to paint a broad brush and say that we're no longer that good country, I think is an unfair statement. And I think is something that is likely the response of a lack of real information that should be spread.
Seth, let me ask you a question, because we've had you on the broadcast before, and we have the opportunity to, to see you before you sit down there in the studio and talk to us. And I've seen you wearing the mask, and I know you take, COVID-19 very seriously. You've talked about that on our broadcast. And yet, one of the things I've heard from friends in Asia is they really don't understand kind of this mindset in the United States. They see it as a civic duty to wear the mask, not just for themselves, but for their loved ones and for people that they pass on the street. And yet here in the United States, it's become demonized within some segments of the country. Talk to us about that and how that's viewed overseas.
Well, I don't know how it's viewed overseas. I can tell you how it's viewed in my house and amongst my circle. And certainly I have friends that are anti-mask. And to me, it's really, I think, a lack of understanding of maybe what we're trying to do here. And I say this all the time to people who say, I'm not going to wear the mask. It's, pick the hill that you want to die on here. And I don't mean that in a COVID sense, but from a perspective of, certainly there are things as the beauty of America is our free market and free will and our ability to think independently. I think that's what's generated the vastness that we've been able to amass as the United States. That being said, there is a greater good that many in America, I would argue the majority of Americans, Republican or Democrat, want to come together and try to solve this. And the lesser of evils of shutting down our economy or wear a mask certainly leads me to want to wear the mask. The desire to make sure that I'm protecting my fellow man is something that I want to do. I can't speak for others, but I can certainly encourage them. And I can certainly speak what I think should be the right thing and hope that they listen to it.
Well, Max, let me ask you about that, because it really is a curious thing that's going on here in the United States. I heard a photojournalist on another network being interviewed in Tokyo, and he said, I'd much rather be here in Tokyo than in the United States, where I just see it as a civic duty to wear a mask. And yet so many people in the U.S. Really kind of feel like this is an impingement on their freedoms. Give me your sense on that part of this, and then also the assault that we saw earlier this week on Anthony Fauci.
Well, I think that it's worth mentioning that Anthony Fauci early on said, do not wear the mask. And he admitted that he lied. And he lied in his mind, or he lied because he said that he didn't want to cause a shortage of personal protective equipment. And that may have cost thousands of lives. So there are no heroes here. Whether Fauci's under attack by an anti-science president or not, this country has completely failed, and it is resorting to technocratic solutions, basically waiting for Bill Gates to produce some big vaccine before anything changes. There are so many changes in behavior that could have taken place. Meanwhile, we have a Secretary of State who is running around pursuing maximalist militarist obsessions around the world, waging a campaign of literal terror, financial terror against Venezuela and Iran, in some cases actual terror against Iran right now. And that's what the world sees. I'm not able to travel to Europe right now. If I were to travel to parts of the Americas, I would have to go into quarantine, or to Asia. The COVID-19 is now seen as the America virus in the rest of the world, and we are one of the biggest gestation points while our country is exporting so much violence. I think this is a real inflection point for the U.S.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your observations. I want to thank all our panelists for joining us. A robust conversation, and we have to leave it there. It's been a great discussion. I'm Mike Walter. Thanks so much for joining us.